All right, Kevin back with you for another episode of the $1 Million Relationships Podcast. And today I am here with Christian Simpson. Christian, welcome. So awesome to have you today.
Oh, thank you, Kevin. It's a real privilege to be with you. And I'm so grateful for you giving me the opportunity to come and have some time with you on your fantastic podcast. I'm a fan.
Yes, I am looking forward to this conversation. This is actually like the third conversation that you and I have had, and we were connected through our mutual friend Bob Regneris. And my gosh, I don't remember exactly when I met Bob. It's been a number of years ago, but I met Bob through Perry Marshall, who Perry Marshall has been. Oh my gosh, I met Perry Marshall all the way back in 1999. So man, that's a long-term relationship there. And but Bob connected you and I just, man, I'll tell you what a testament to the power of relationships, because when Bob sent that message to you and I, Christian, uh, anybody that you have a relationship with, like I have a relationship with Bob, that was like, Kev, you and Christian should really talk and get to know each other, because you guys are just in such alignment with how each of you show up. And I think Christian would make a great guest for your podcast, and that just carries so much weight. And Christian, so now you and I, we haven't even really talked about this before in our previous conversations, but you obviously have a pretty close relationship with Bob too, because I know after our last conversation, I messaged him and just said, hey, here's a quick update, and here's what Christian and I've been talking about. Here's what we're doing, and he told me how him and his wife are getting ready to come over and visit you, and he was pretty stoked about that too, and stuff. So.
Yeah, well, I think that what's interesting about that, Kevin, is you've spoken about your longevity of relationship with Perry Marshall, who I'm also a big fan of. Of course, he's unquestionably the thinking man's marketing guy, and he's also what I think is refreshing about Perry is that he's a man who is steeped in integrity in a world that there's less of that today. So I have a deep admiration and love for Perry Marshall. And with Bob, actually, what's interesting is that I don't have the longevity. So it kind of plays into how relationships can be built on, the quality of a relationship isn't always down to longevity. So I first met Bob Regneris in Perry Marshall's Brown Table in January 2020. So I had profiled Perry for a year about, my CEO and I at the time. We spent about a year profiling, who would be the best teacher in the marketing space for us now to work with. And, Perry was our choice. And we went over to this event in San Diego, and Bob was in the room in that round table. Now, sadly, that was my last meeting because, of course, the world went belly up. The interesting thing about that, Kevin, very quickly, is that Perry Marshall in that room had us doing an exercise focusing on what would your business do? What would you do with your business in the event of a black swan event?
Wow.
And I looked at my CEO and I said, what are we doing this for?
Yeah,
and
right.
What do you know? 3 weeks later, so I'm blaming Perry for COVID.
There you go. You kind of
so anyway,
that,
Bob and I, we didn't connect at that meeting. I Bob sent an email out after that, and I sent a response to it, and the response to that wasn't particularly endearing. He wasn't being rude. It was just, very sort of a bit dismissive.
Okay.
And so that was interesting. But then I went to Chicago literally last April, a year ago, well, coming up to a year, to Perry Marshall's AI and traffic event.
Okay.
And Bob was in the room. And firstly, my wife, Anna, connected with Bob separately to me during the event. There was about 150 in the room or so. And she came over to me and she said, you know Bob, don't you? I said, yeah, I do know Bob. I said, not very well. And she said, wait, you didn't connect with him at all? I said, well, no. And she said, well, he's a beautiful guy. And I said, well, I imagine he is. I just don't know him. And then I met Bob, and goodness me, did we connect? And you know, Bob Regnerus is a profoundly powerful, true coach and leader. I mean, he's obviously in my world, so I might sound a bit biased doing that, and we'll talk about what that means in a moment, Kevin. But in a world that overuses and misrepresents that term coach to the nth degree, that man is very much the rarity. And I know because I'm training him to the highest standards. So I'm grateful to Bob for introducing you and I, Kevin. And we have had only a few conversations, you and I, but boy, have we covered probably a good quarter of a lifetime's worth of conversation in those meetings, right?
For sure, for sure. Well, what I'd like to do is I want to turn it over to you, Christian, and we'll start off by setting a little bit of context. I want you to be able to share with our listeners, share about what you do, who you serve, what inspires you most about the work that you do, and also give us some backstory into how you even got into doing what you do.
Oh, all right. Okay. So I serve, I guess you could say, two audiences, although they do cross fertilize.
Okay.
So, firstly, I create the elite influencers of the coaching profession. Now, what does that mean? Well, for the last 30 years, I've been doing that. I've created industry leading coaching training programs for the likes of Bob Proctor, for John C. Maxwell. And now I do it for myself in my own organization called the Conscious Coaching Academy, which is the industry leading award winning accreditation in the industry. So I am the outright purist. I'm the guy who sometimes is the fierce and sometimes grumpy protector of the purity of the coaching process, Kevin, because it is the most transformational process known to mankind. But sadly, the vast majority of people out there calling themselves coaches are nothing of the sort. And I'm sure we'll come on to that at some point. So firstly, that's what I do. I take individuals that want to be the very best in this profession, who want to have a profound transformational influence on people's lives and businesses, and help them do that. And many of those are entrepreneurs who either wish to give back because they built businesses that serve them very well as cash cows or so forth, or they are simply entrepreneurs who do not want to do anything other than what they're doing in their business, but they want to be able to influence at a higher level to create far greater freedom. So their staff are thinking for themselves. They're not having people coming to them for the answers. They're able to influence enormously in sales and in other areas of the business where it's crucial. Most entrepreneurs don't think about the fact that the ultimate skill to have as an entrepreneur is the power to influence. And we are raised with a model, not of influence. We think we're influencing people when we're manipulating them. And that's not our fault. We just don't know what we don't know. So that's the first thing I do. The second thing I do is help entrepreneurs that are at least over 500,000 in revenue, that are hitting ceilings of complexity that is denying them the growth that they need, to help them move beyond that by helping them understand that it is the quality of the thinking that they're bringing to their business that's the problem. They will not find the answer to their problem, their growth problem, by looking outside of their business for solutions. The solutions is not only inside their business, it's inside their marvelous mind. So my work helps them raise their consciousness to improve the quality of thinking they're bringing to their business and break through those ceilings of complexity and then dramatically accelerate their growth. That's what I do in the world. Now, my passion for it, to answer your question, I think probably people can tell my passion for the coaching process. This is the most overused, misrepresented, and abused term out in the marketplace. When the true coaching experience is delivered to an individual, it is profoundly transformational because it is the only intervention, aside from the therapies like psychotherapy, but they deal with past issues and trauma. It is the only intervention that makes the unconscious conscious, Kevin. Now, what does that mean? Well, we're all driven by forces that are outside of our awareness, ideas that we have accepted from authorities and individuals and other channels like the media, and whether it's teachers of a religious nature, teachers in school, parents. We are products of our environment largely. And we are programmed. We're programmed by our culture. We're programmed by our society. And some of those ideas serve us, and many of them do not. But if you're not aware of them, you can't manage and you can't modify or change them. So we sabotage ourselves and limit ourselves without even knowing it. So coaching is the only intervention that makes the unconscious conscious by drawing those ideas into the consciousness of the individual so that they can consciously evaluate them, to ask the question, how does this idea serve me in the pursuit of the growth objectives that I have, or how does it detract from that outcome? And until that happens, nothing else can change. It's why Carl Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. And sadly, the vast majority of, well, all of the human race to a certain degree are mostly unconscious in their lives, in their decision making, in their behaviors. We are habitual creatures. We think habitually. We therefore consequently behave habitually. And then we wonder why we create habitual results that frustrate us time and time again. So in the entrepreneur space, that's why you get people working harder for longer and longer, and yet only seeing marginal, if any, growth in their businesses. Ultimately frustrating. It's not their fault. They just know no better. So that's why I'm passionate about coaching. Nothing raises the consciousness of our species more than it. And let's be fair, Kevin, you've only got to look at the world we live in and to see how desperately we need are of becoming a more conscious species. The interesting thing for me, Kevin, is 500 years before the birth of Christ, Buddha said the only challenge, he didn't say one of them, the only challenge for the human race is ignorance, the opposite of awareness. And nothing's changed in 2,500 years. The only thing that has changed, Kevin, is we have become more technologically advanced, which is accelerating enormously while still remaining consciously retarded. Yeah. And that is a dangerous species, I can assure you. We live in a world where today everyone's getting super excited about artificial intelligence and no one's talking about organic intelligence. And I can assure you, your artificial intelligence is not going to be put to work in your business and your life to much effect if you don't, enhance the organic intelligence, which puts it to work with great power. So that's why I'm passionate about what I do. Now, in terms of how I got here, that's a long story for sure, and I'm happy to share it. So the seeds of the work that I do in the world really came from my parents, and particularly my mother. So I'm an only child. English, I'm sure, as many of you can gather, if you're listening in the States, for sure. My mother was a very successful, very driven, very successful model and promotions lady in the late 60s and 70s. So she worked for Charles the Ritz and Lancôme and Chanel and big cosmetic houses like that, a few others, Biotherm and people like that. And, she was a real, glam puss when I was a young boy. I used to have all the kids giving me, she appeared in the local newspaper, I remember one time, and all the kids were, telling me how much their dads fancied my mom and stuff like that. So, I was like, okay, right. As you can see, Kevin, I get my looks from my father. I'm just kidding. He was a good-looking guy as well. I think I was adopted, Kevin. Anyway, so sadly, when I was about 11 years of age, my mom started to change in her behavior profoundly, acting out of, it was only a few instances. It didn't happen day to day at that stage. And then one day, my father sat me in the car and he said, "Look, have you noticed that your mom is sometimes saying some strange things or behaving oddly?" And I said, "Yeah." And he explained the menopause to me, and so okay. And then I remember one instance where I was playing a record on the old turntable, because you and I are that old, Kevin, the old vinyls, right? And I was with a friend and we were dancing to this track, and she rushed in the room, grabbed hold of the 7-inch single that was spinning on the turntable, broke it into pieces, threw it on the floor, and accused me of, or both of us, of ridiculing her. And that was kind of a moment of a 12-year-old boy that I was then thinking, I don't I don't understand what's going on here. Anyway, cut a long story short, over the years, a few years after that, mom deteriorated into severe mental illness. She wouldn't accept help. She wouldn't accept hormone replacement therapy, and she became increasingly, well, there's no better word for it, Kevin, deranged.
Okay.
And you know, it became a very difficult household for my father and I to live in. In fairness to my father, he and I worked hard to get help. The system is not engineered to help anybody going through this until the individual concerned is a threat to themselves or a threat to others.
Okay. Okay.
So, a few years later, my father left to go with, he'd found a new relationship. And I didn't blame him for that because I don't think he'd survived. He'd survive if he continued to stay. I stayed another week until I was putting my fist through my bedroom door because when you've got somebody so close to you who's highly intelligent but mentally deranged, you can't describe how clever they are at pushing your buttons and all sorts of things that are going on. Mom was lost, and so cut long story short, I had to get my mom sectioned under the Mental Health Act when I was 21 years of age, men with white coats coming to get her, and all of that. Worst day of my life. Even my mom's eventual passing was nowhere near as bad as that day because I knew she'd be okay on the end of the passing, and she'd spent 4 years bedridden after a nasty stroke that took her ability to move everything but her eyes. A bit later on, so she had a rough end of life, did my mom. But I didn't know at the time, Kevin, because that had a legacy on my life. It was difficult. I looked after my mom, and I'm proud that I did. But I was typical British guy. I'd be out there, always the happy guy, center of the party, cracking the jokes. But if somebody upset me, it wouldn't take long for me to react at all. So I was a bit like a snake, under all that humor. And so that was the unexpressed pain expressing itself. And as you get older, that increasingly, unless you deal with it, unless you are willing to gain the self-awareness and face the mirror and look in that very difficult mirror that sometimes has a reflection looking back at you that you don't like seeing, that will continue to express itself in all kinds of dysfunctional behavior the older you get, because it wants to be owned. The unconscious produces it continually. So I had to work on myself a bit later on in my life, which I'll come to. But it did sow the seed, Kevin, of becoming fascinated by the non-physical side of our nature. So I was in a sales career for many years, and I loved that time. And I didn't realize until my early 30s, when I was going in a direction of wanting to help people live more successfully. I came across a website in about 1998, and I cannot remember for the life of me what the website was, but I was in a career in the telecommunications field at the time, senior sales role. And I had a business idea, because I being a sales guy I worked for some great American companies over my sales career: Yellow Pages Sales Limited, Pitney Bowes, fantastic sales organizations. You Yanks know how to do it well, Kev, right? And so I have a lot to be grateful for those experiences. And so I had this idea. The telecommunications space was weird because I'd come through these very structured sales environments where you were trained very, very structurally, very successfully, Yellow Pages, Pitney Bowes, but not in the telecoms field. There was none of that. It was, you arrived and there was your desk, and you might get your laptop arriving next week. Your phone might come the week after if you're lucky, and off you go. And I'm like, oh, what do you mean off I go? And I don't think an employee fears anything more than, doesn't fear the client experience. They fear not knowing their own business well. So I thought, you know what? Why don't I create a consultancy that provides onboarding for telecommunications companies? So I was doing some desktop research into that area, and this website I came across, it had one line, and it said, he said it was explaining coaching, and the line that struck me, it said the answer's always in the individual. And why it struck me, Kevin, is I had always found that, but I didn't even think into it. Now, just to wind back a little bit, my success in telecommunications came from the team around me. Telecommunications is, as you can imagine, some of the data networks. And in those days, they were talking about all kinds of things like quality of service, WANs, LANs, wide area networks, all this stuff that used to make me glaze over, in my eyes. I didn't know what they mean, quite frankly. So I had technical support, I had project managers, I had commercial finance teams and all of that, because these were big bits. I mean, these were multi-million pound, not dollars, multi-million pounds networks and so forth for large banks and people like that. And at the end, I was selling through third-party system integrators who had huge data delivery. So I would never achieve my success without these relationships and without these resources. And we used to have to go into a place where you had to bid for them. And I was always, I thought it was because I was a nice guy. People used to say, I want to work on Christian's bid. I want to work on Christian's bid. And I used to get those resources. And I realized when I hit this website that the reason behind that is that when we would meet prior to a client meeting, I would always sit with the individual and I'd be saying, so help me understand, what is it that what is it that brings you to this organization? And how do you see your career going? And what brings meaning and heart to you in the work that you do? And what makes you do what you do? What excites you about it? I'm just curious about people, ultra curious about what makes them tick. Yeah. And I didn't know, Kevin, until I came to this website, that actually I was kind of an unconscious competent in the coaching space, nowhere near as gifted as I had to be in order to be a professional one, but I was already doing it. Mm-hmm. So I then, through a friend of mine, we then went together to an open day with a coach training organization in 2000 and signed up straight away for a professional accreditation. And that's where the journey started. But the seeds of my work in the world were sown by, and I'm very grateful to my dear mother, who's no longer with us, for her, what I believe to be, Kevin, her sacrifice to help me live into my purpose.
Wow. It's interesting. And when I hear you share about your mother, Christian, I lost my father when I was 16, and he got diagnosed with cancer at the beginning of my 9th grade year, and a year and a half later, he passed away at the end of my 10th grade year. And for that year and a half, for a kid of 15, 16 years old, to watch your dad deteriorate, man, that's a challenge. And as challenging as that was, I also had plenty of time to have lots of conversations with my dad, meaningful conversations that I'm just, to this day, I'm incredibly grateful for that whole turn of events. And you and I, because we have, all of us have things that happen in our lives, but it's us who gets to decide the meaning that we're going to place on that. And we can place meaning on that serves us, or we can place meaning on that doesn't serve us. And I know lots of people in my life that they've had experiences that they place meaning on those experiences that is not serving of them, and yet how powerful is it when, as you shared, this meaning that you placed on this whole thing, that you're not necessarily an enjoyable series of events at all, but yet because of the meaning that you chose to place on it, look at what you have been able to go on and do. And here we are now, years later, and look how many. all the frontline lives of people that you've served through your trainings and through the work that you've done, but also because so many of them are entrepreneurs who they're impacting so many other lives too. And the true impact of the work you've done, you'll never truly know the ripple of it all, but it's been massive, all because of the meaning that you chose to place on this. And man, talk about
Well,
powerful.
thank you, Kevin, for those kind words. Well, bearing in mind, it took me some years to come to that realization. You know, I wouldn't wish that experience on anybody, of course. And let's you know, it was very, very difficult. But of course, there are people that go through far worse. At the time that we're speaking, Kevin, look at what the people of Gaza are going through, and the people of Ukraine. So you know, they're seeing children, their children die in front of their. I can't even imagine that that horror. So it has to be put into perspective. But you know, it took me a while to come to a place where, you know, I shifted from resenting that experience, never resenting well, there were times I resented my mom, absolutely. You know, when you know, she was phoning my girlfriend at the time and calling her all kinds of names under the sun for no reason. You know, you're a young man. But she knew no better. And so, you know, as much as you're angry, you don't realize that at the time. But when I come full circle and, you know, I get into my 30s and, you know, I embrace the coaching process, which I'll talk to you about later, in terms of the teacher and the relationship there and what that did for the man that you're speaking with now. Then I was able to be in a place where a full sort of 180-degree shift to utter gratitude and recognizing the suffering that that lady went through in order for me. I'm not suggesting that she deliberately went into, but, you know, I believe souls make choices. As far as I'm concerned, my mother's sacrifice was incredible to sow the seed in my mind to live my life, as I said earlier now, on purpose. And I'm a man on purpose. I love my work. You know, you've kindly mentioned the impact of my work. And I've not even started yet, as far as I'm concerned. But it all came down to that lady and, you know, her suffering. So, you know, God bless her. Thank you, Kevin.
Yeah. Well, now that we've got some context set here, I'm going to switch gears. I'm going to reiterate the question for the benefit of our listeners. And so, Christian, have you ever met or been introduced to a person or persons that completely changed the course of your life or your business, so much so that much of what you have today would not be possible if not for this person or persons? And I'm just really interested, Christian, to hear your story and your experience around this topic of relationships.
Well, Kevin, you know, I think this question that you put to your podcast guests is extraordinary. I have to say, I commend you enormously for it, because it's to the uninitiated, it could sound simple. I don't think it's difficult for people to drum up names in their lives of somebody who, or several people who have had a profound impact on them. We all need at times in our lives, Kevin, somebody who sees more in us than we see in ourselves. And sometimes we need to see ourselves through that person's eyes in order for us to step up to the next level in our lives, because we're too busy, you know, telling ourselves how much we're not worthy.
Yeah.
You know, and I've got some names to share with you, but you put a question to me a week before the podcast, and you said, Christian, I want you to think into the 3 relationships that have had the biggest impact on your life.
Yeah.
And so I went away and thought into that. And I do want to share some names with your listeners in a while, but I have to answer that question in the truth, in my truth. And when I thought into the question, and this is why I'm commending you so much, Kevin, my answers I don't think are that Well, they're not people.
Okay.
The
Okay.
top three. So let me
Okay.
explain. So the first one is unquestionably the relationship with myself, which
Mhm.
is still in the place of evolution. I don't think it ever stops. But you know, I've spoken earlier in this podcast about becoming increasingly conscious in your life. For me, that's a forever game. Um, you know, the ultimate cause and effect relationship in our lives, most people are unaware of this. Between our results are a direct correlation to the ultimate cause and effect relationship is our level of consciousness. That is ultimately what determines our results in any area of our lives. You can see people who are highly conscious in the area of business and finance, but are not always highly conscious in the area of their health. And you can see vice versa. And relationships, you can see people that are very, very successful in their businesses and their in their financial world, but have a myriad of dysfunctional relationships. So my journey of becoming more conscious in my life, and again, this is an ongoing process. I've learned to know myself at a level that I had no concept of earlier in my life at all. And this correlates. My three relationships, Kevin, are myself, the coaching relationship, and my relationship with Source, the
Okay.
intelligence of all life.
Okay.
And they're all interrelated, and they all play into the work that I do and the profound level of work that I do in my
Okay.
space. So I want to be clear with our listeners that I can assure you, everybody, I am utterly bloody useless at just about everything you can possibly think of, apart from what I do for my living and for my purpose. DIY in my house, Kevin, stands for destroy it yourself. And so if anything goes wrong in our house, my wife is in terror. Thankfully, GSI, get someone in, is always the solution. Um, so that relationship with myself, the sort of going within, continuously going within. I work with a psychotherapist, a lovely lady called Sam Lawson. I've worked with Sam now for over 10 years. I,
Wow.
I I
Wow.
love that process working with her. I worked with coaches for many years, as you might expect, Kevin. But I've kind of got to a stage, and this might sound conceited, but it's certainly not shared in that spirit. I don't know a coach now that I can work with because I'm kind of two or three questions down the line from them, just simply because I've done coaching to the degree I have, and I can self coach to a big degree. But Sam's approach with psychotherapy helps me embrace my darkness, the shadow, Kevin, which is a very healthy shadow. You can't live that experience we spoke about a while back and not have a very healthy shadow, right? I have to work on myself in order to be the best husband I can be, the best father I can be, and certainly to serve my clients at the level I can. And I do. And I said to you something earlier that I know was interesting in our conversation. What's made me earn the global reputation that I enjoy in my space, and I'm very grateful for, has been my dysfunction.
Mhm.
Um, because in facing my dysfunction, in working through and recognizing and owning my darkness, which I'm still work in progress and always will be, allows me very much to see that working in others and to ask powerful questions that helps them become conscious of that side of their nature. Law of polarity, the law of opposites. We've all got darkness and light in us. We've all got ignorance and awareness.
Yeah.
Um, it's just who you choose to be in any given moment of which side shows up. I always remember in a seminar, Kevin, saying something quite controversial in that particular room because it was a room full of people of the Christian faith, where I said, there is a Christ. Christ and Hitler were on the same team. Now you can imagine how that went down.
Yeah. Right.
Um, and I explained. I said, there is a Hitler and a Christ in us all. It just depends on who we choose to be in the moment, what level of consciousness we choose to bring to the moment. Hitler served the human race by giving us an example of who, personally, I would choose never want to be, in terms of not the individual, himself, but the behavior, the toxic, life detracting behavior that came from an unevolved soul. His behavior was, of course, certainly from my perspective, which is the only place I can speak into, stomach churning. But he provided the example of a one end of the human experience, ignorance, and then, of course, Christ or Krishna or Buddha or whatever more enlightened individual that you wish to name represents the opposite. And so someone said to me, at that point in that seminar, they said, well, I know I don't have any Hitler in me. And I said, really? I said, do you have kids? And she said, yes. I said, I can guarantee if I came at your kids with a knife, you'd find the Hitler in you. And that, so the law of polarity, natural law, cause and effect, law of polarity, law of opposites, it has to exist in us. Of course it does. And it's part of the human experience. Ignorance is a purposeful part of our human experience, because you cannot know yourself unless you first don't know who you are. So my first relationship, Kevin, is my relationship with myself, because I can't help others develop their relationship with themselves to the degree of being able to perform at the level that they need to in their lives if I hadn't walked that path myself.
Yeah.
And then the second one is the coaching relationship, which might surprise some of your listeners that you would think of that as a relationship. But it's the coaching relationship that has done two things either side of it in my three. My relationship with knowing myself, as per the know thyself above the theatre in Apollo in Greece, and my relationship with the terminology I would use as whatever label people associate for themselves for the intelligence behind all life is their business, has come through the power of the coaching relationship. I wouldn't be aware of my oneness with that source without the coaching relationship. So it has been a profound, it's had an immeasurable impact on my life. You have to bear in mind, Kevin, that, what I haven't shared about the journey around I'm not a religious person, Kevin. I'm open to share with anybody in the world that quite frankly, I abhor religion. I think it masks spiritual truth, and quite frankly, I don't find any of the man-made theological fear-based constructions that we have in the world are helping our world at all. I respect everyone's path to the divine, but I don't think they help at all the theological constructions of our world. But I was raised in a Church of England school. My mom was a lady of faith, and we went to a Pentecostal church. And I also had a best friend who was Catholic, and I occasionally went to his Sunday mass. I took my religious studies exam 2 years earlier than my peers because I was quite steeped in that knowledge. But by the age of 12, I turned away from it all. And not to be an atheist, I always knew that there was something there. But all the teachings around Christ and how they were portrayed through the lens of the theology that I was exposed to, even though it was quite broad through those different, it was Christianity, but in different flavors, didn't resonate with me, didn't make sense. And that was that. And my mom, before she became poorly, really poorly, she had the awareness to sit with me one day and say, son, if this is not your path, don't take it, which was an extraordinary thing to do.
Yeah.
And so the reason I wanted to share that is because for the next 20 years, if anybody had mentioned the G word, the big G word in front of me, it wouldn't have been for me. In fact, what happened some years later is somebody put a program in my hands by Bob Proctor, actually. And he mentioned the G word in it, and it nearly went in the trash, Kevin, because of that. So I wasn't atheist, but I couldn't abide that sort of, because I was interpreting this word through the lens of theology.
Mhm.
Now, the coaching relationship, and I'll explain the moment and why this is so profound. I was about 4 or 5 years into practicing as a coach. And one of the biggest learning curves of becoming a coach is to be fully present in the moment with your client. And when you're fully present, you don't have to think into the questions at all. The questions are presented to your conscious mind by your unconscious, the most powerful part of your character. And conversely, the question that comes to you is then asked to the other individual and bypasses their conscious mind straight to their unconscious. So it's an unconscious to unconscious communication. And one day I was driving back from one of my clients, a large corporation, and I was thinking about this. I was thinking, well, hang on. If I'm not thinking into these questions, who is? And so I didn't come to an immediate answer, but I was pondering on this for a while. And then I picked up a book called The Biology of Belief by Bruce Lipton. And that fed that curiosity even further when he started talking about, the fact that there are billions of processes going on in our bodies in any given moment, and we're not consciously doing them at all. I'm not consciously beating my heart as I speak with you now, Kevin. I'm not consciously digesting my last meal, splitting the cells in my body, firing the neurons in my brain. All of that's being done by me, but for me.
Yeah.
So anyway, cut a long story short, I began to realize that there was an intelligence within me that I wasn't fully conscious of. In fact, I was hardly conscious of it.
Okay.
And I started to listen to further build my relationship further with my intuition, the teacher within, to start to listen to the nudges, to the intuitive pulls, the gut wrenching, the gut feel that was seeking to communicate to me at a higher level than my intellect was capable of. And things started to change. And then I ended up in traveling to the States to get into Bob Proctor's world. And then Bob's teachings started to profoundly impact my knowledge on this area, because I realized that the God word that he was using was not the one that I was associating with theology.
Okay.
And so the coaching relationship birthed this entire awakening, which is what the purpose of coaching is, to raise the consciousness of every individual. And that comes to it. That's the whole purpose of it. And that's exactly what happened to me, which led then to that third relationship, Kevin, that I have to highlight, which is my relationship with that source intelligence of all life, knowing myself to be at one with that source, just as everything else is. There is only one thing, Kevin. I appreciate this might be a contrarian view to some people that might be listening to your podcast. But, if you go into the field of quantum mechanics, quantum scientists will tell you that there is a field of energy called 0-point field from which all energy emerges and returns to. So there is only 2 points of reference, Kevin, that we can go to in the world to find out what we're all about and where we come from, or what this is all about. There's the theologian. The theologian will tell you that God is the cause and effect of, to use religious theology, himself. Shows our prejudices, just saying himself, is omnipresent in all places at all times and cannot be created or destroyed. Go to the scientist. The scientist will say everything is energy. You are energy. It's omnipresent in all places at all times, is the cause and effect of itself. And so these are not opposing teachings. They're actually complementary, but just coming at it from a different side of the mountain. So all of that was profoundly enhanced with my work with Bob. And I'm very grateful to Bob Proctor. He's certainly one of the people that I could say to you when we get to the people end of my key relationships. There are a few people there, and I'm going to close off by sharing them because you asked the question. I know you only asked for
three, go right ahead.
You only asked for 3, but I'm going to be greedy.
No, okay? You go right ahead, Christian. You go right ahead.
I guess that I've just had a life blessed by so many people pouring into it. So I'm super grateful. But The next relationships would be Jacob and Emily Simpson, my kids. And that's a very short one, Kevin, but they introduced me to a level of love that I couldn't even conceive prior to their arrival. So prior to the arrival of Jacob, I had no idea of a level. If you understand that everything is frequency, everything's a vibration, and consciousness is a frequency of vibration. Everything vibrates, nothing rests. The stuff that we see that is matter has slowed its vibration. Your soul, Kevin, slowed its vibration in order for you to come into this meat suit and experience this time on this spinning blue planet. And the more conscious a person comes, the higher frequency of vibration they operate at in their thinking and their behavior. And you realize there are, just so many levels. Hence why a great teacher many, many years ago said, my father's house has many mansions. And Jacob and Emily have been my greatest teachers. In a career blessed by working with, some of the greatest teachers out there. I've shared the stage with, the wonderful Les Brown. As you know, I spent a decade with John C. Maxwell, and Bob Proctor, and I've shared the stage with some of the, really, really great names. But they have been, as individuals, profound teachers for me, my children. Then there's a guy called Paul Martinelli, who lives in Florida.
Okay.
And he is an extraordinary entrepreneur and a remarkable human being, quite frankly. He was the president of Life Success, which was Bob Proctor's organization.
Okay.
Paul was a self-made entrepreneur who built his empire by he was in the commercial cleaning business, and Bob Proctor was playing in his office every day. Born Rich, his program, and other programs like that, just going round and round and soaking into the consciousness of Paul Martinelli. And he credits and he built his business to generate, his millionaire status, sold it to generate that, and credits Bob with that. And anyway, at the end of that, by hook or by crook, he and Bob ended up working together. And Paul built Bob's training company between, I think, 2006 and 2009 were the key years. I came in 2007. I was a participant. And I just got fascinated by how these big events were put on. So I used to go into the room in the morning, Kevin. I asked permission if I could go in early and help Paul's operations director, Cheryl Fisher, his right-hand lady, to set up the room. Because I just wanted to see because it was new to me, or this whole, and it was great. And Cheryl kindly allowed me to do that. And I was fascinated by this guy who ran this show, who I found out from Cheryl would go around every room in the hotel where the event was on. And if there was one mark on a seat or one mark on the bed sheet, he wouldn't have the room. I mean, he was so, his leadership was extraordinary. Anyway, cut a long story short, I got noticed. This English guy in the suit, rocking around. So, Paul Martinelli started asking questions about what I did. And there was a beautiful guy called Paul Hutsey who'd worked with Bob Proctor for years, one of the most wonderful chaps. He'd taken quickly, in his career, he'd become one of the most successful prudential managers in the history of the Prudential life insurance company in the US in the 80s and the 70s by putting Bob's work to practice in I think one of the most economically deprived and also population with a low population in the US. Incredible achievements. And Paul sat with me over lunch and just asked me questions about what I was doing in England, which was I was transforming the performance culture of some of the world's largest organizations by transitioning management to leadership. So helping managers, people that were put in charge of performance of the organization through people who generally managed people. Management is the measurement of people, process, and performance. Leadership is the development of people, process, and performance. Helped them by coaching them one-to-one. And then I transferred a certain level of coaching ability so they would then coach their line reports.
Okay.
So they wanted to create a certification, and there was an ex-colleague of mine doing some teaching on coaching there, but that relationship didn't work out. And I got the opportunity to go on stage and do my thing. That I had no idea where that would take me, quite frankly. But Paul Martinelli gave me that opportunity. He was one of those people that saw my talent, saw my ability, and just gave me that stage, Kevin. So I'm very grateful, and I never forget what he did for me. And it didn't end there, by the way, because a few years later, Bob and Paul had gone their separate ways. And by the way, late Bob now, because Bob passed away, as we know,
Yeah.
just over a year ago, and that was a very sad day. He Bob's always been someone who's very dear to me, and he's always often in my ears.
Yeah.
And not just the personal input he put into me. I had the pleasure of doing Beyond the Secret with Bob, sharing the stage with Bob many, many times. He was also a big fan of my teaching ability and my work from stage. So I'm super grateful to Bob. But years later, I say a few years later, about 2010, at the end of that, towards 11, Paul had developed a relationship with John C. Maxwell. And after creating the certification program for Bob, a proposal went in to do the same for John.
Okay.
And the coaching side of that, it wasn't accreditation. There wasn't the quality control of accreditation, which I now do in the coaching space. But it was an opportunity to bring my expertise into the Maxwell world, which, of course, John has a enormous, enormous footprint,
Yes. Yes.
particularly in the US. So I then spent 10 years creating a world-class coaching training and delivering that world-class coaching training for people that came in to be a John Maxwell team member.
Okay.
And so I came out of that relationship in May 21. I was already 3 years into planning the Conscious Coaching Academy by then. And it was time for me to step into and bring the standards that I adhere to in this industry, and the benchmark that, quite frankly, is the benchmark of this profession. And it was time to call that forth. So there you have it, full circle. Now, Paul Martinelli, Bob Proctor. And if that's not enough, I guess that an interesting one to finish it off with is, and it's an entrepreneurial one,
Okay.
an entrepreneurial one, but not one that we expected. Depeche Mode, Kevin.
Okay. Okay.
So I've been a lifelong fan of Depeche, and I've kind of grown up with them. I do love their music naturally. Their lyrics have fed me for many years on my journey. Both they are a very emotional and spiritually intelligent group, but the interesting aspect about Depeche Mode for me has been their entrepreneurial journey. Now, over in the US, they're huge around the world now, and it's quite interesting how much they're being celebrated right now as we speak, because they're on a huge global tour in their
Sure.
Mente
Yeah.
album, and it's great to see, even after the loss of Andrew Fletcher, who I've met all of Depeche a couple of times, but Andrew we met in 2015 in New York, just happened to be in Trump Towers, and he was having a drink, and he was wonderful with my kids. He was such a beautiful guy. And it's such a shame that he's no longer with us. But in our country here in Britain, they're celebrated now largely, Depeche, but they for many decades not at all. Even when they sort of commanded the American market, which took them until 87, 88 with Music for the Masses. And what I always admired about them, Kevin, is, and this is a big entrepreneurial lesson for us all, even when things weren't going, I mean, don't get me wrong, they had success in Eastern Europe. Martin Gore, who writes the songs, was a millionaire by then. So, you can argue it's hardly tough, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they were not getting they were getting credit. I mean, the press in Britain have been brutal towards Depeche Mode for many years. but they stuck to their path, Kevin. They stuck to their knitting. They didn't stray from their core fundamental electronic roots, even though they've done rockier outputs. It was all still electronic based. They did Songs of Faith and Devotion in '93 that was a bit more rockier, but they stuck to their core principles and they always did what they wanted to do. They've done unconventional things. They don't release the most obvious single off their albums. They always release the song that was really hard hitting to announce that they were back and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And there was something about that had a profound impact on my entrepreneurial thinking. That, when you look at Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich, an entire chapter dedicated to persistence, which he found, and he describes as, persistence is to the to the mind of man what carbon is to steel, I think is the quote, where he found that all of the successful, the big difference between the highly successful people that he interviewed on the sponsorship of Andrew Carnegie in that generation, and what people don't realize is Napoleon Hill also interviewed the failures of his generation too. The difference was in persistence. And persistence is an output of higher consciousness. I remember Einstein, I think Einstein's got many quotes attributed to him, but I think one of the most, and many of them he didn't even make, but I know the one that he most definitely did was where he said, "It's not that I'm so intelligent, it's just that I stick with the problem for longer." Edison was another great example of that. So anyway, I've gone full circle there, but today I know that they've had enormous success for many years, but what I've admired enormously about Depeche Mode is their ability to just stick with their path, and they refuse to, and they do their own thing. They refuse to take the commercially easy route, let's say. And I've always admired that. So there's been plenty of others, Kevin, but that's kind of my greedy grab to quite a lot of relationships that have impacted me.
Yeah. Wow. I'll tell you, this is one of the most unique interviews that I have done for this podcast over the last 2.5 years. This has been just really phenomenal, Christian. And, and how you just brought this back around, talking about, closing out with Depeche Mode and how they just stuck to it and just didn't give up. And I think, like, man, we've all, anybody who has reached a level of success, a level of mastery in doing what they do, and like we can look at whoever, sports figures or entertainment figures, that they make what they do look so easy.
Mm-hmm.
And it's because they have put in so much time at doing what they do and becoming world class at what they do. And if I look at me and if I look at you, the same thing is totally true. We have invested lots and lots of hours in just getting to become the best that we possibly can at doing what we do. And it's for, I don't speak for others, but I know for me, is I just want to be able to make my biggest possible impact in this world.
Yes, absolutely.
And so that behooves, well, it requires two things. It requires that I continue to invest in me and continually honing my skills and just getting better and better at what I do. And then also just really getting a good understanding of who I can be most valuable to. Because there's two, you got to have those two pieces. And I mean, for me, for years, I've just loved entrepreneurs. Anybody who would become an entrepreneur has got my respect, because becoming an entrepreneur is not an easy path. And so anybody who would do that, man, I love talking with entrepreneurs, but it would be silly for me to think that my skill set that I could be the most valuable to every entrepreneur. That would be ridiculous to think that. But I have
Well,
found that there's a
you,
certain
a-
entrepreneur I'm most.
absolutely. I love that, Kevin. Yeah. I mean, we can't, and I think this is an important point. 80/20 is a well-established entrepreneurial principle that, there are certain activities that have a vastly, a disproportionate impact on our success than others. And the more that we can 80/20 our lives and fractal 80/20 it, the better, and focus on what we do. But the same is with people. You're absolutely right. Is that,
Totally.
I mean, trying to be a friend to everybody makes you a friend to no one. And, be willing to be polarizing. I'm certainly polarizing, and I certainly have sovereignty in my business. I do business with who I want, when I want, at the price I want, if I choose to do business at all.
Yeah.
And anybody that wants to come in and transgress those boundaries, I sack clients. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't think I'm difficult to work with. I have I have an extremely close-knit global community of clients that are with me for years. We have industry high retention rates, and I'm very grateful to them because they help me grow as much as I like to think I help them grow. I'm very grateful for them. But to your point, you can't serve everybody. And let's be clear, every entrepreneur is a business owner, but not every business owner is an entrepreneur.
That's right. That's right.
There is a different level of thinking in entrepreneurs. And I agree with you that anybody who steps into a business owner entrepreneurial path deserves respect because, hey, we're taking fundamental responsibility for our outcomes. There's no safety net. We can't turn up, take a week out of the office because we just don't feel like it, or, we can't be half-hearted and live for our weekends. We have to be full on all the time. Live, breathe, eat, think continuously. Most of the time, let's be honest, sleep. We've all had sleepless nights about our businesses, those of us that have been around for a while. We've all wondered, am I going to make it at times? That's part and parcel of the entrepreneurial journey. We've all doubted ourselves. We've all played the comparison game. You look at Elon and people like that and you think, well, hang on a minute, how's that all happening? And, where am I? We've all done that. And, social media can amplify that enormously. But the bottom line is, you're absolutely right, Kevin. Know who you wish to serve and then go all out to serve them to the highest possible level you can, maintaining absolutely sovereignty in your business, because your business should be a reflection of you. It should be a reflection of your values, and the people that you come in and serve in your business should have similar values, not necessarily the same map of the world, not the same beliefs, but the same values. Most people think values and beliefs are the same thing. They are not. They're fundamentally different.
No, they're not.
Values are soul facets that we come into this life with. Beliefs are inherited. So values are inherent. Beliefs are inherited. I've got people in my world who have vastly different maps of the world than I do, and I celebrate that. I love that. I've got mentors who have vastly different maps of the world than I do, and I know that they're the people that I learn most from. The contrarian maps of the world, the ones that I sit and think, well, that's interesting. So, what has Kevin look at life like that? And I find that fascinating. So there's so many people that will dismiss somebody as a mentor or a teacher because they don't have the same, map of the world, the same religion, the same belief system. They are, quite frankly, very limited individuals. It doesn't mean that you have to buy into someone's map of the world or agree with them to simply draw if my point is, Kevin, those people that have a very different map of the world, but they can bring you value, if you are dismissing them entirely because they've got a different map of the world, you are losing their value. I've got a marketing mentor who's an outright atheist. He's spiritually crippled. And, that's his path, his journey. I respect that. It's not for me to intrude on that. But he has abilities that I have learned enormous amounts from. And he's had a profound impact on my business. But we would never see eye to eye in that area of life. But I'm so grateful to him for that. Anyway,
Yeah.
we could go on forever, couldn't we, about
Oh,
that?
we could. We could. Well, Christian, for anybody listening to this, man, I mean, I just really appreciate everything that you've shared. And for anybody listening to this going, man, Kevin, I really like Christian. I really like what he stands for. I love the way he shows up. How can they find out more about you and the work you're doing? Any resources, any websites that they should go check out if they want to find out more?
Yeah, you bet. Of course. I could always reach out to you, Kevin, if you're happy to help them. But if they wanted to go and find out about what I do in the world, they can go to christian-simpson.com. So that's Christian as in the religion, hyphen, and then Simpson as in the cartoon.com. And you'll see that website is mostly focused on my work in the coaching space. But if you go to resources, you'll find plenty of the work that I do in the entrepreneurial space there too. And if they want to reach out through the contact facilities there, I'll be delighted to hear from them if they're interested in anything that I've said today or anything I can add value with them, add value to them with. I'll be delighted, Kevin, if they've
Awesome.
to help them. So thank you very much, Kevin, for allowing me this platform of yours to hopefully, if nothing else, just have added some perspective and value to. I hope I have to some of your listeners, and it's been a tremendous privilege, and I'm super grateful for you because we've only had 2 or 3 chats, you and I. But
that's right.
For you to extend this opportunity to me was very gracious and very generous of you.
Well, this was just such a valuable experience. I'm really excited to share this with a whole lot of other entrepreneurs. I know it's going to be incredibly valuable for them. And so thank you, Christian, for taking the time to have this conversation. Really appreciate it and really appreciate you.
Right back at you, Mr. Thompson. Right back at you.